In today's video, I'm going to be tearing down and completely reassembling an iPhone 8 Plus. This iPhone 8 Plus I purchased from a customer for $150. I also spent about $80 in aftermarket parts. I chose to go with a gold housing because a customer asked me if I could put a gold iPhone 8 Plus with a black screen together. So this was kind of a custom order. Um, this iPhone 8 Plus was completely destroyed. The screen was destroyed. The rear housing was bent like a banana, so there was no way this was going to be an everyday functional device had we not done the complete teardown and rebuild. Um, the first thing you have to do is take the two pentalobe screws out of the bottom and heat up the glue so that you can tear the screen away from the housing. I use a heat mat for this, and then you take a flat blade at the bottom and fit it in the bottom corner, get some lift, but don't go in too far. You don't want to damage the home button. And then take a nylon spudger and just kind of slide it through the groove that you created, the space that you create, to cut that glue away. You don't want to go in too deep with it, and you don't want to use the blade to go all the way around it. You risk cutting through ribbons or damaging other components inside of the phone by using a metal blade if you go in too far. So the nylon spudger is perfect for that. But again, even with the spudger, you don't want to go in too far. The toughest part was at the top here. There was no structure left. That plastic was completely caved in on itself. So you do have to be extra careful not to damage your front camera. Front camera assembly is about $20, and it's a pointless repair to have to take that apart and add a new front camera if you can get it out without breaking it. There are 4 screws here. This bracket covers the LCD connector and the home button connector. In my previous video, I documented that I like to pattern my screws according to where they came out of the phone. This is essential here because you've got 4 screws and the first 3 are not like the fourth, and you don't want to put the wrong screw in the wrong place. It's very important to disconnect the battery before you go any further. You don't want to do any damage to your board. And then take the spudger and pop those 2 connectors. There are 2 more screws at the top that hold that metal bracket in place, and this is for your front camera assembly. Once you get those screws out of there, you pop that little cover off, and then very carefully with your spudger, you want to go in with a good angle to make sure that you don't damage the pins to pop that front camera connector out. And it pops right out, usually no issues. And as you see there, that housing was pretty damaged. Well, we'll get to that in the next video. For today's video, we're just going to focus on tearing down the screen and rebuilding it. You've got 3 these are Y000 screws. There's 3 on each side. You want to take those out and pattern those down as well. There's another screw down at the very bottom. We'll get to that in a moment. That's a Phillips head screw. So you're going to need 2 different screwdrivers to tear down this screen. You got 3 of the Y000 screws on the right side, 2 on the left, and then 4 that cover the home button connection bracket. Be very, very careful with this home button. If you damage this home button, you're going to lose Touch ID, and you lose home button connectivity as well. If you damage the chip on the home button, for years there was no replacing the home button function. There are aftermarket home buttons now that restore home button function if you do damage this chip on the home button, but no Touch ID. I like to take a flat blade and slide it underneath the home button very, very, very carefully. You can actually heat this glue up from the front side of the screen to help that home button come out a little easier. I use a heat mat again, but you got to be very careful not to damage that home button. There's the final screw for the shield for the screen. That's a Phillips head screw, which is kind of odd, but make sure you put it in the right place on your mat. Then you're going to have screws up at the top to hold your ear speaker and your front camera assembly. At the very, very top of the screen, having some issues with my magnetic screwdriver here again. I'm going to have to replace this thing soon. I try to magnetize it and it just doesn't ever seem to get the polarity I need, and screws fall off. As you can see here, that top plastic piece of the screen was completely disintegrated, and when I got the screws out, it completely came apart from the rest of the screen. It makes it a little bit harder to get your ear speaker off, excuse me, to get your front camera assembly off, because there is some adhesive on there, and the structure of the screen helps, I guess, get some leverage on that front camera assembly. Um, but you know, just with the right amount of patience, we were able to get that front camera assembly off without damaging it. That's always important when you don't want to spend extra money on components that you don't have to spend money on. And that's essentially what it's going to look like to completely tear down a screen on an iPhone 8 Plus. You want to be able to reuse as many parts as you can. Most screen repairs, you don't have to replace anything but the screen itself, and you transfer the components over. For the removal of the front camera assembly, I like to use a pair of tweezers and slide it underneath. There are these plastic bits that hold your proximity sensor in place. I like to use that, put the tweezers underneath those plastic bits and pop that part out. If you try to pop the proximity sensor out on itself, you can rip the proximity sensor off the front camera assembly. The plastic bit underneath it kind of helps it pop out. And then you want to slide your blade in on the left-hand side to remove any adhesive that's sticking it onto that frame. Now, teardown is complete for the screen, and now it's time to rebuild it. You want to make sure that you face your shield in the right direction so all the screw holes line up. Pull the LCD and home button cables through and make sure everything is placed properly so nothing gets pinched. And then you start putting your screws back in. 3 screws on the right, 2 on the left, 1 at the bottom. Again, it's very important to put the screws in the right place so that you have all the screws where they need to go. You put the screws back in the wrong place, it's not as big a deal on the screen, but you might find yourself short some screws where you've already put them in the wrong hole. One at the top, there should be one closer to the bottom. A good magnetic screwdriver is key to these repairs. And your final screw will go down at the bottom to the left of where the home button slides into place. I said in a previous video I like to put the home button on first. That's no exception with the iPhone 8 Plus. Pull the plastic film from the front to open the hole, because this home button is going to be a little different. You slide it through the front and pop it in to the back. Use your finger to hold it in place, and then put the plastic back down so it doesn't fall back out. And then you usually I take a pair of tweezers and hold the connector in my hand so that the home button can slide underneath it and wrap around it. You want to make sure that the connection is even with the connector, and then pop it in place. Then you can put your shield back over the top of it and slide your 4 Y000 screws back onto the home button shield so that it holds it in place. Again, being very key not to put too much pressure, and don't torque those screws down too tight. You don't want to damage your home button. I keep harping on that, but you don't want to lose Touch ID function. You got to be extra careful with the home button. Take your tweezers and pop that little film off to expose the adhesive that will help hold your front camera assembly in place. I remember when the 7 Plus and the 8 Plus came out, these home buttons feel like origami. You have to fold them in just the right position. But there are some guiding pins. I always put the little connector there with the 4 little metal connectors on it for the ear speaker. There are guiding pins to the left and the right. You pop that in place, and then the adhesive will hold it in place. And then you can slide your proximity sensor into its slot. You want to take your ear speaker and put it on those little metal connectors. You can just line up the screw holes there, and you're going to fold the front camera assembly over the ear speaker, and then this metal bracket will fit right on top of that ear speaker with the holes all lining up. As long as you've got everything lined up, you shouldn't have any problems getting everything screwed back down. And then you're going to take a Phillips screwdriver for these last 5 screws and screw your front camera assembly back into place. 5 of these screws, and essentially once these screws are done, that's it for screen replacement. If we weren't tearing down the rest of the phone, we would be reassembling it. Part 4 will be reassembly with putting the screen back into the phone. So that's going to be an end for today's video for the most part. The screen is completely done, completely reassembled. We're going to set this off to the side for now while we finish the teardown process. Stay tuned for the next video. The next video is going to be completely disassembling the housing and all the internal components so that we can get those transferred over to the new housing. If you like this video, please click that like button, and we'll stay tuned.